Thanks, go.
So last we spoke, we were headed to Jerusalem with Paul and hearing about what is going to happen to him when he gets there. There's a prophecy about how he will be bound and handed over. And we were kind of thinking about what it looks like to live a life, or what it looks like to be a martyr, what the witness of a martyr is. And so here we are. Paul is headed to Jerusalem. So Acts 21:15. After these days, we got ready and started to go up to Jerusalem. Some of the disciples from Caesarea also came along and brought us to the house of Mnason of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we were to stay. When we arrived in Jerusalem, the brothers welcomed us warmly. The next day, Paul went with us to visit James, and all the elders were present. After greeting them, he related one by one the things that God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. So, when was the last time Paul was in Jerusalem? I mean, probably has been since the Jerusalem Council, perhaps, and a lot of things have happened since then, since he was in the place where everything began. He's traveled all over Asia, all over Greece, and has really discovered this mission to the Gentiles, and discovered that when he goes to the synagogues and preaches, there's this outpouring of interest, this outpouring of followers, this outpouring of conversions, people, being in awe of the story about the Messiah. And so he's telling these people, he's telling James and everyone in Jerusalem who have still been there, what they've seen, and they're happy to hear that. Anything to add about that?
All true.
This is James right here, the brother of Jesus, of course. When they heard it, they praised God. So amazing what God has done. Then they said to him, "You see, brother, how many thousands of believers there are among the Jews, and they are all zealous for the law. They have been told about you that you teach all the Jews living among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, and that you tell them not to circumcise their children or observe the customs." So they kind of went pretty quickly from rejoicing about what's going on to, okay, we've got this problem now. And did you notice this word zealous? What do you make of the word of these Jews who are zealous for the law?
In the early church, I guess in today's usage, we often talk about anger as sometimes kind of a good thing. Righteous anger, being angry about this cause, anger as a motivator. And in the early church, anger was one of the 7 deadly sins. Anger was always bad. Not if you feel anger. Everybody feels anger. Paul says, be angry, but do not sin. So it's not about having the emotion of anger, it's hanging on to anger. It's a refusal to forgive, it's a desire for vengeance, a desire for destruction. And for every vice in the early church, there was also a corresponding virtue. And the opposite of anger was not chillaxing. The opposite of anger was zeal. It was being zealous. So you would describe, I think, Martin Luther King's feelings about desiring safety and well-being and freedom for all people as a zeal for the well-being of these people. And he had a zeal for the people who were being discriminated against in the South, and he had a zeal for the well-being of the people doing the discriminating. It's kind of interesting. So I think zeal in its positive form is this sort of active passion for the good of truth, the good of justice, whatever. So in a way, it's not as though they're being depicted as these jerks, They have this zeal for God's truth.
Mm-hmm. And for good reason. I mean, they have lived generations all the way back to Moses, have been following these customs, have been kind of sacrificing everything in order to follow the law, in order to circumcise their children. They've not had an easy go of it.
You can say that again. I mean, there were these pogroms against Jewish people going way back because they were the only outlier in the ancient world who didn't worship the gods. You know, there was one religion in the ancient world, which was just the gods. You have your gods, I have my gods. My gods kind of correspond to your gods, or my gods don't like your gods. But it's really one worldview, except for Judaism, who are these big, problematic outliers. Because clearly when the gods are mad at you, somebody's doing something wrong. It's probably those people who deny the existence of all the gods.
So for Paul to come back and for maybe some rumors to end up in Jerusalem, or for people to be kind of spreading these ideas that Paul, who of course himself describes himself as zealous for the law, we'll hear later on he describes himself in Acts as zealous. So for them to hear that he, or accuse him that the Jews living among the Gentiles are to forsake Moses and to forsake and to not circumcise, to not observe the customs, is a really big deal. So they would understandably be upset about that.
But is that what Paul's doing?
Well, that is the question. Obviously, it's not, and there's going to be a lot of accusations against Paul as he goes throughout Jerusalem, and so the question is, how is he going to respond to that? So the leaders of the church in Jerusalem say, well, you know, these things are being said about you, Paul. What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you are now here, that you have come. So do what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Join these men, go through the rite of purification with them, and pay for the shaving of their heads. Thus all will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you, but that you yourself observe and guard the law.
Paying for barbers. It's a noble act.
So what is going on here? Why would he go through this rite of purification and shave people's heads?
Fashion.
We heard about it once before. It's the Nazirite vow. So once before in the book of Acts, Paul has already made this vow, which is really to set himself apart, and it shows up in Numbers. You put this slide together. You picked some old-fashioned language.
Oh, I did. Sorry.
So you get to read it.
All right. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When either man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazirite, to separate themselves unto the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine, or vinegar of strong drink. Neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. All the days of the vow of his separation there shall no razor come upon his head, until the days be fulfilled, in the which he separateth himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy, and shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. And the Nazirite shall shave the head of his separation at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall take the hair of the head of his separation and put it in the fire which is under the sacrifice of the peace offering. So you have someone taking a very solemn vow to God, and they grow their hair long, they don't drink strong drink, they do other things that are involved. And what are some examples of these sorts of people? People in the Bible with long hair who don't drink alcohol.
I might have just given you a hint.
Nice.
Maybe this is who you have in mind. Maybe
It's
not.
one.
Yep. So Samson, right? Samson, who is, can wrestle lions and has all these, this amazing strength. And of course, when his hair is cut, he loses his strength. Another example, perhaps?
And so, I mean, it's the story of Samson, if you don't read the kind of precursor to the story, the pre-birth narrative, the origin story of Samson, just sounds like some kind of silly, magical story in which his power is stored in his hair, and once he loses his hair, he loses his magic power. The prehistory of Samson is that his mother vows a vow that if she can have a child, he will be dedicated for his entire life to the Lord. He will be a Nazirite from birth. His hair will never be cut. He will never take strong drink. He will live this Nazirite life from day one. And so when Delilah cuts his hair, this is not just Delilah taking away like his ruby slippers or whatever. This is Delilah ending his life as someone consecrated to the will of God. Which is really interesting, I think. The other one that I think of is from the New Testament. Are there any people who have an odd diet and have long hair and live out in the wilderness? Who's, for us, we're like, okay, you know, he has long hair, he lives in the wilderness, eats this weird thing, you know, locust and wild honey. It doesn't ring bells for us. For a first century Jewish person, he's an archetypal Nazirite since birth, like Samson.
Samuel
being
another. I was thinking Samuel is also another example of someone who's set apart from birth, as someone set apart for God.
And so those are kind of permanent Nazirites, which has nothing to do with Nazarene, by the way. City of Nazareth, totally separate. Those are permanent Nazirites, and then you have what Acts is talking about, a temporary vow. So we see Paul take one of these. We see, I don't know if we have any other examples aside from this in the New Testament of temporary Nazirite vows. But they were a common thing in the Old Testament. You were going to undertake something, you were vowing a serious vow, and this is the way that vow plays out. These are the things that you do to accompany that vow. And when that vow is done, then you shave your head, you burn the hair of your vow, and then you go back to just being a regular person who's not living under a vow.
So the leaders of the church in Jerusalem are encouraging Paul to participate in this rite, in this purification rite, along with 4 other men, to demonstrate his commitment to the law, to his commitment to Judaism, to show his faith that he has not forsaken Moses, that he's not forsaken the law, that he, in fact, is willing to go above and beyond and set himself apart. And make further sacrifices in order to show his faith and his Judaism.
And I think it's worth noting that one great Jewish scholar, Jacob Neusner, who's often known as the father of American Jewish studies, like one of the most published academics in the history of the world. He has like 1 billion books. But he always really emphasizes that you can't talk about Judaism in the first century. You can only talk about Judaisms because there are so many different types of doing Judaism, none of which look like our friends at Temple Micah or at Washington Hebrew or at a modern-day Orthodox congregation. All of whom have things in common with all those people, all of whom are in continuity with those people, but Rabbinic Judaism is a post-temple phenomenon. And what's happening, there are no, I assume, Nazirite vows happening in modern-day synagogues, because this is very temple-focused worship.
So then the leaders in the church go on, and this is kind of a little bit of an aside, I think. But as for the Gentiles who have become believers, we have sent a letter with our judgment, that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and from fornication. What's going on there? There's this letter with our judgment. It seems to be like not related to what they were just talking about, which is the concern about Paul's faith in Judaism.
Yeah, what do you all think of this letter? Why are they bringing up this random letter now? Please.
Well, they're backing off the Torah and the circumcision demand, which caused trouble all the way through, including up to this point.
Yeah, so they're not. It's not that they're saying we're done with Torah, we're done with circumcision. What they're saying is, let's read the Torah. What does the Torah say about Gentiles living in Israel? This. Like, if you want to be Torah compliant, if you want to be living for Torah, let's see what the Torah says about the Gentiles who enter in. So it is avoiding idolatry, avoiding meat with blood in it, avoiding sexual immorality. These are what the Gentiles have to do. Not eating strangled animals, because a strangled animal has not had the blood drain out of it. So it's not about the manner of death, it's about eating the blood in the animal. The blood is the life force of the animal from the ancient conception, and this is true for ancient cultures across the board. When the blood grows cold, the animal is dead. So there's a sense that like the heat of the animal, the life of the animal is flowing in the blood, and that belongs to God alone. So I mentioned last time, I think, or at some point, there were like ancient jokes about Christians who are these like weird people who wouldn't eat blood sausage. Because this was taken very seriously in Christianity. So you get to Ireland and then black pudding takes over, and you know.
It's also possible that this letter is referring to the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15. Just to kind of look back a bit, Acts chapter 15, therefore I've reached the decision, of course, I think this is James himself talking, and the question back then was, again, like you said, do Gentiles need to be circumcised? It's a huge debate that the church has not figured out. They've got all of these people who are potentially from pagan backgrounds that have not been a part, or at least are God-fearers and have not been circumcised. So what do we do? So they reached the decision that we should not trouble those Gentiles who are turning to God to be circumcised, but we should write to them to abstain only from things polluted by idols and from fornication and from whatever has been strangled and from blood. For in every city, for generations past, Moses has had those who proclaim him, for he has been read aloud every Sabbath in the synagogues. And so every Sabbath in the synagogues, I believe, they would read these particular words from Leviticus 17 and 18, which are these practices. I don't get, there's no way you would be able to read that. But it's kind of describing what Bertie was just talking about, the requirements of both those people, of both Jews, but also foreigners living amongst the Jews who, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to be circumcised? What laws are they supposed to follow? Well, at least these four things, they're not going to engage in practices linked to paganism. They're not going to be, and you described it a lot better than I did, stuff about blood. And that's as far as I can go in that description.
Does anybody, I brought this up at a forum on Sunday, but does anybody remember the scene in, I think it's the Odyssey, in which Homer has to talk to one of the dead, and so he sacrifices goats and like lays out their blood, and shades come up from Hades to lick the blood of the goats? It's because they're longing for life. So it's their longing for the life, the warmth of these animals. And so it's this ancient conception that like, this is the life, and life belongs to God alone. Also, this is the life, and this is part of a lot of pagan worship. This is what a lot of pagan sacrifice is about. It's kind of transferal of life and taking of life and so forth. Whereas the sacrifice of the temple is not about killing it all, nor is it about taking the life of the animal for anyone. It's just about life belonging to God. You might say, how is worship in the temple not about killing? This is too tangential, but for 1 second. In the Torah, everything about worship in the temple, about the temple sacrifice is spelled out, except for one thing: the death of the animal. There's virtually nothing about how to kill an animal in the temple, because the death is not the ritual part. The death doesn't actually matter. The animals are just food. So you can have a wheat cake, you can have a side of beef, you can have, a pomelo or whatever. It's about a shared meal with God. It's not about death. So anyway, you never take the life for yourself. Sometimes you're given the life, in a sense, by God, like on at the time at which Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, the people make the covenant with God, Moses makes a sacrifice, or Aaron makes a sacrifice, and the people are sprinkled with the blood of the animal. And it's this moment of being transformed and cleansed by this life that God is sharing with God's people. You also have the Day of Atonement ritual, in which the whole temple is kind of flicked around the blood of the sacrificed goat. So it's kind of like the life that's shared by God is like cleansing everything, but that life always belongs to God, so no blood. And no idolatry as well. No worship of demons, which is how they would articulate it.
Anything else you want to add about Leviticus 17, 18?
Let's just read the whole thing slowly.
So we go back, I guess, let's see. So then Paul took the men. So we go kind of back to the narrative. Paul took the men. The next day, having purified himself, he entered the temple with them, making public the completion of the days of purification, when the sacrifice would be made for each of them. And all of this whole topic, I mean, this ritual sacrifice of animals and Nazirite vows, it all feels so foreign. You know, it just all feels so hard to understand and wrap our minds around, and so different from what we do in church now that, you know, it's hard to think about how it might relate to what we're doing in church. One way that I was thinking that I wonder if it might relate to what we do is in all of these stories and all of these practices, it's about something being set apart. So the Nazirite vow is a person who is being set apart for a purpose. The animal is being set apart, I suppose, for the purpose of helping have a feast with God.
Yeah, share a meal with God, absolutely.
The people of Israel themselves are people set apart for a purpose. And so I wonder if we're thinking about like being set apart, like the set apartness of the people of Israel, or the people who are kind of like these various kind of levels of set apartness that you can find. How might that relate to what we're doing in the church now?
What do you all think?
It's strange. Very strange. I don't think about it in terms of what we do in church. Maybe I should.
Religious orders, absolutely. Yeah, so we talk about monks and nuns being consecrated to religious life. We talk about vestments being consecrated to use only in the church. We talk about church architecture being consecrated only for God's purposes. I think this idea of setting aside some for the sacred is still very core to what we do, and even consecrating the Eucharist.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, the idea of consecration. So consecration, when you know, there's a moment in the Eucharist when we say, God, send your Holy Spirit upon these, you know, upon this bread, send your Holy Spirit upon this wine. That is the moment of consecration, when we are asking God to set apart these elements to become something special and unique for us. And so we kind of do it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And even everybody in this room holding a microphone has been consecrated in our ordination. Like, literally, I mean, just like logistically, if I want to go out and get like a second job at McDonald's, I have to have permission from my bishop to do that, because I'm not technically permitted to do secular work. Like, I'm consecrated only for the church's purposes. That's part of the vows that I've taken.
So it's not like you know, we think of like being set apart, we think of like the people of Israel as being like elected. Sometimes we worry about that as like, oh, well, they're being exclusionary, or we're excluding people. But I think it can help to think of it not as being exclusionary, but actually setting apart for a purpose, which is to become closer to God.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also never exclusionary in the sense of like, oh, these are the buildings God likes the most, or these are the people God likes the most. Instead, it's people who God is using for his purposes, you know? So, I mean, on the school bus, there's only one school bus driver. That person may not be wildly well paid or have massive high status or whatever, but like that's the person whose job it is to drive the school bus. And a church may not be a wildly beautiful building. You know, it may be a small and humble building. It may be like one that I served in, which was large and hideous and built in 1989. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the most special building, but it's set aside for this one specific purpose. And I will tell you, as clergy, ain't nothing special about us clergy except for the fact that we're set aside for this one specific job. So certainly not being more holy or being more loved by God.
Couple hands, yeah.
I'm just thinking about this in the context of Lent, and like no one here is taking an Nazarene vow.
Speak for yourself.
Okay. It's not the same level. But in a way, we're kind of setting apart every time if you do get something out. Maybe it's like you're taking that time to set apart that moment to think about, I'm not doing this because I'm trying to get closer to God and I'm trying to make the sacrifice. And so it's, I don't know, to me, like there's a connection there between like, it's not that who cares what you're doing not, but it's that you have that moment set apart to think about why you're doing it, to then try to find a way to feel closer to God.
Absolutely. And I mean, like in our Eucharistic prayer in Rite 1, we talk about making our lives a living sacrifice. And so I think the goal is consecrating all of our time, all of our money, all of our activities, all of our thoughts, everything as things that are sacred to God. You know, kind of incorporating God's will into every millisecond of our lives.
Anton.
Yeah, in my case, I've been working on this book over the start of the year, Song of the Saints, about praying through the saints with prayer beads. And each of the folks, as we discussed this point, have worked themselves in one way, shape, or form to be set apart. People like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Frederick Douglass. The one that's honored for this week is Margaret of Cortona, who, of all things, is a monastic, female monastic, has a Cinderella-like story in her setting apart.
Amazing. That's wonderful. Thank you.
When the 7 days were almost completed, I guess that's the 7 days probably of the process of the Nazarite vow, I think. Do you think? I don't know.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. The Jews from Asia, who had seen him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd. Who are the Jews from Asia?
Is it China? Is it Asia Minor?
Maybe it's Asia Minor. Maybe it's folks from like Ephesus, where Paul has been, who are, remember what's the context here? Why is everyone in Jerusalem? Pentecost. So Paul, that's another reason, another example of how Paul is like an observant Jew. He had to go to Jerusalem because he wanted to observe Pentecost. So it would make sense that there would be Jews from Asia, from other places other than Jerusalem, because they have arrived for this, for the observation of Pentecost. They had seen him in the temple and stirred up the whole crowd. They seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against our people, our law, and this place. More than that, he has actually brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." Has Paul been doing that?
No.
But they are accusing him of this, and they're accusing him, what's more, of having brought Gentiles into the temple, which kind of goes with their same theme. So if the temple is a place that is set apart, there are some people who can enter because they have purified themselves, living, doing all the rituals like in order to enter the temple, living life in a certain way. Gentiles just haven't done that. And so this stone right here is actually an inscription it's a warning inscription that hung along outside the sanctuary of the Second Temple, and a warning to pagan visitors to not proceed further. So there's good reason for them to not want Greeks to enter.
Yeah, not proceed further on pain of death.
That's a pretty big
major sign.
Yeah. So they're accusing Paul. They had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Do we think he did that?
Seems unlikely.
Seems unlikely. Then things get dramatic. Then all the city was aroused, and the people rushed together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and immediately the doors were shut. While they were trying to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. Okay, a tribune of the cohort. Anyone who knows a lot about Roman history can tell us about the tribune of the cohort in this room? Who's a tribune? The police? All right. Immediately he took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. When they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the tribune came, arrested him, and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. He inquired who he was and what he had done. So, of course, it's in the interest of the tribune to keep this mob from getting out of control, because that's his job, right, is to kind of keep order, and if there's mobs and all kinds of protests and killings, his life is on the line. And he ordered Paul to be bound with 2 chains. Do you remember what was prophesied about what would happen to Paul? This man Agabus came when Paul was still on his way to Jerusalem and said, he took 2 ropes and he said, "You will be tied like this." So now it's happening. He's being bound with 2 chains. The tribune inquired who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd shouted one thing, some another, and as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. So this is just a chaotic scene. No one can hear anything. He can't hear if Paul even wanted to try to say something. He can't understand what he's saying. There's just tons of people there. It's a problem. When Paul came to the steps, the violence of the mob was so great that he had to be carried by the soldiers. The crowd that followed kept shouting, "Away with him." Does this remind you of anything? I feel like we could just be we could be reading the scene from Jesus right now. Just as Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, "May I say something to you?" The tribune replied, "Do you know Greek?" So what do you think just happened there? Paul asked in Greek, "May I say something to you?" And the tribune is like, "Wait, I didn't know you knew Greek." Why is he surprised by that? Well, let's find out. "Then you are not the Egyptian who recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 assassins out into the wilderness?" So he thought Paul was this whole other person. He thought Paul was this other, perhaps, zealot, or another person who has come to Jerusalem to rile people up. And in fact, this Egyptian who recently stirred up a revolt and led 4,000 assassins, Josephus actually says something about him. Josephus mentions this same Egyptian. "Moreover, there came out of Egypt about this time to Jerusalem one that said he was a prophet, and advised the multitude of the common people to go along with him to the Mount of Olives, as it was called, which lay over against the city, and at the distance of 5 furlongs. He said farther that he would show them from hence how, at his command, the walls of Jerusalem would fall down." So this guy is like prophesying the destruction of the temple. "And he promised them that he would procure them an entrance into the city through those walls when they were fallen down. Now when Felix was informed of these things, he ordered his soldiers to take their weapons and came against them with a great number of horsemen and footmen from Jerusalem and attacked the Egyptian and the people that were with him. He also slew 400 of them and took 200 alive. But the Egyptian himself escaped out of the fight, but did not appear anymore. So he escaped out to the wilderness, and Paul was not this Egyptian. Anything you want to add about that? No? Okay.
Yeah, I guess. So you have a bunch of these uprisings, and a lot of them are tied in part to the chronology, that's a sort of internal chronology of the Old Testament as understood by rabbinic teaching at the time. So you have 2,000 years of the age of chaos, 2,000 years of the age of Torah, and the age of Messiah should be beginning right about now, but it hasn't, unless you think that Jesus is God incarnate, the Messiah, which we do. But for a lot of Jewish sects that didn't know about Christ or didn't believe in Christ, they were still waiting for the Messiah. So you have all these kind of military leaders who are kind of living out these messianic tropes and creating these big military uprisings. So this is one of them. You have a huge one in the 130s when Shimon Bar Kokhba is declared to be the Messiah, and he's even recognized as the Messiah by one of the most important rabbis of the day. This gets recorded in the Talmud. He creates this huge rebellion. It's this massive uprising. It's way bigger than the one in which the temple was destroyed. They fight back against Rome, and they are brutally crushed. And that's when the city of Jerusalem is utterly destroyed. It's in the 130s that the Romans come and dismantle and obliterate the entire city except for the Wailing Wall. They build a statue of, I think, a horse, like an emperor on horseback on the Temple Mount, and then they take the really bad, really scary places where the really important gods are, and they build a temple of, I think, Mercury over one and Venus over the other. And do you know where those spots are? The site of the crucifixion and the site of the resurrection, interestingly, which are now both covered by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So anyway, this sort of Egyptian, this leading this uprising, this is sort of par for the course in this age in which everyone was looking for the Messiah, but assuming the Messiah would come as this victorious military general and king, a sort of second King David.
And Paul, before he kind of was convinced that the Messiah had come, perhaps wasn't like in the exact, we don't know what exact sect he was in. He might have not been exactly, like believed exactly what this Egyptian thought, but it's just kind of ironic that this man who had been persecuting Christians and who might have been doing what this Egyptian did now he's being blamed for it, but he, of course, hasn't done this. He's being blamed for something else, I guess.
What year is this?
Fine question. We know that Paul's crucified under Nero, sort of 67, 68-ish, and this is before that?
Maybe the 50s?
Maybe the 50s. Happy Days era.
Why did the Jews of Asia have such an influence?
It's a good question. I mean, so Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, is kind of at this point, is one of the centers of the world. So if you are a first century Roman and you're thinking about where you would really like to live if you've made it, like Turkey would be really high on your list. So they would think of places like Turkey, Greece, North Africa, parts of the Middle East as being the place where all the wealth came from, all the culture came from, all the learning came from. That was like the center of the world. And then you have these awful, soggy, barren, cultureless wastelands like modern-day France and England and Germany, and just like awful places that no one would want to go. But Turkey becomes this very serious power center. Places like Ephesus, one of the great trading centers of the day. You later, obviously Constantine decides to build his empire and base it in what becomes Constantinople, the old Byzantium, because Turkey, Asia Minor, is such a center of the world at this point.
But that's where the influence.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a place where there's a lot of wealth, a lot of culture, a lot of power, but it also may be that this was just some random group of people from Asia Minor where Paul had been riling up all the Galatians, riling up all the Ephesians, and so they were like, this guy is messing up everything in all the communities of Asia Minor. Somebody stop him.
And this isn't the first place that a mob happens. I mean, we've got mobs going on in places like Ephesus. So, yeah. And just one more point kind of before going on to this next little section is that notice where Paul is arrested. What was he doing when he was arrested? Where was he? The temple. So, I don't think that's a coincidence, especially thinking about what the significance of the temple would have been for Paul and for anyone who was Jewish and was looking for the arrival of a new temple. But who is the new temple? I just gave the question away. What is the new temple for Paul? Jesus. So how interesting that he's arrested at the temple and now, what the message that he's preaching is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So Paul replies to the tribune, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of an important city. I beg you, let me speak to the people. When he had given him permission, Paul stood on the steps and motioned to the people for silence. And when there was a great hush, he addressed him in the Hebrew language, saying, Brothers and fathers, listen to the defense that I now make before you. When they heard him addressing them in Hebrew, they became even more quiet. What a dramatic, beautiful moment. Just beautiful writing right there. And the defense that I now make before you, I think that the Greek word probably there is going to be apologia. So he's getting ready to make a defense, an apology. I don't know. I don't have this thought out, the difference between like an apology and a witness necessarily, but he's about to provide a story about where he's been and what he's done. And of course, he's saying it in the Hebrew language now. First, he was speaking Greek to the Roman, and now he's speaking Hebrew to his fellow Jews. I am a Jew, born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in the city at the feet of Gamaliel, educated strictly according to our ancestral law, being zealous for God, just as all of you are today. So there's that word zealous. This guy right here in the statue, that's Gamaliel, who Paul would have studied under when he was a young boy, and of course sat at his feet. This man was a rabbi, Gamaliel, so he would have spent like a lot of time with him. I persecuted this way up to the point of death by binding both men and women and putting them in prison, as the high priest and the whole council of elders can testify about me. From them I also received letters to the brothers in Damascus, and I went there in order to bind those who were there and to bring them back to Jerusalem for punishment. There's a lot of binding going on. Which is interesting, I think, because he's been bound. Now, Paul has been bound, and before he was bound, he was binding other people. Just kind of like a terrible cycle of binding. While I was on my way and approaching Damascus, about noon, a great light fell from heaven, suddenly shone about me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I answered, Who are you, Lord? Then he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not hear the voice of the one who was speaking to me. I asked, What am I to do, Lord? The Lord said to me, Get up and go to Damascus. There you will be told everything that has been assigned you to do. So just pausing here, is this the first time we're hearing this story in the book of Acts? We've heard it at least once before. Luke himself kind of narrated it as it was happening to Saul, and now Paul is beginning to tell his own story. Do we need to pause? Should we keep going for a little bit longer? What do you think?
A few more minutes?
Okay. So what do we know then about his defense, about his apology, his story? What makes a defense? What makes an apology? Well, we're getting the first sense of it. He's kind of telling his calling. He's describing how he ended up here and how the Lord showed up to him. Since I could not see because of the brightness of that light, those who were with me took my hand and led me to Damascus. A certain Ananias, who was a devout man according to the law and well spoken of by all the Jews living there, came to me. And standing beside me, he said, "Brother Saul, regain your sight." In that very hour I regained my sight and saw him. Then he said, "The God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will, to see the righteous one, and to hear his own voice. For you will be his witness to all the world of what you have seen and heard. And now why do you delay? Get up, be baptized, and have your sins washed away, calling on his name." Any comments on that? Pretty cool story.
Heard it before though. Oh, one little thing. We're saying that Gamaliel is not only a kind of interesting figure who Paul's like, look, I'm legit. I studied with Professor Barnes over at the university. Gamaliel is one of the great public intellectuals of his day. Like this is, if you're like, who's the most famous rabbi? Probably Gamaliel the Elder. Like this is a big deal.
Yeah, he was the son of or grandson of Hillel, and yeah, big deal.
Is that right?
That's what I read.
Or maybe
Could be wrong.
grandfather. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think Hillel's later. But anyway.
Okay. After I had returned to Jerusalem and while I was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw Jesus saying to me, "Hurry and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me." And I said, "Lord, they themselves know that in every synagogue I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you. And while the blood of your witness Stephen was shed, I myself was standing by, approving and keeping the coats of those who killed him." Then he said to me, "Go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles." So this is the stoning of Stephen. We don't know that Paul was actually there, but he's like taking responsibility for his kind of participation in the persecution of the Christians in general. And this vision, this trance that he sees Jesus in, Luke did not narrate that earlier. So this is kind of a new part of the story that we're hearing from Paul. And what's the message? Where is he to go? What is his job? I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Up to this point, they listened to him, but then they shouted, "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live." And while they were shouting, throwing off their cloaks and tossing dust into the air, the tribune directed that he was to be brought into the barracks and ordered him to be examined by flogging to find out the reason for this outcry against him. But when they had tied him up with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who is uncondemned?" Whoa. When the centurion heard that, he went to the tribune and said to him, "What are you about to do? This man is a Roman citizen." So Paul has mentioned that he was like a citizen of this like city, but he has not revealed that he's a Roman citizen until this moment.
And it's worth saying that they're not just overwhelmed with a concern for justice and following the rules. If they torture a Roman citizen, they are liable to torture themselves. This is serious business. Paul, I believe, was from a city which, I didn't prepare for tonight, so this may be wrong, but I think Julius Caesar gives, after the civil wars, gives Tarsus a special sort of dispensation as a sort of free city, and he makes a lot of the population Roman citizens because they had been supporters of Julius during the civil wars rather than his rivals. And so Paul's father or grandfather probably would have been made a Roman citizen during that time, and then it descended upon Paul.
how did we prove that he was a Roman citizen?
Passport?
Yeah.
No. It's a great question. I mean, it's funny, it's so hard for us to imagine, we who live in the ultimate kind of surveillance society, how you would prove things, and yet these things seem to function in this day. They would identify people, but yeah, it's a really good question.
Yeah, and I was thinking, what image can I put up here? I put the 12 tables, the law of the 12 tables, which is of course just like the origin, like the list of the rights and duties of Roman citizens. But I was like, I wish I could, is there like a passport for a Roman citizen I can put up there? No, I don't think so. But, the tribune came and asked Paul, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And he said, "Yes." The tribune answered, "It cost me a large sum of money to get my citizenship." Paul said, "But I was born a citizen." Immediately those who were about to examine him drew back from him, and the tribune also was afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and that he had bound him. Since he wanted to find out what Paul was being accused of by the Jews, the next day he released him and ordered the chief priests and the entire council to meet. He brought Paul down and had him stand before them.
It's like relieving how many rights a Roman citizen has, and really concerning how few rights everybody else has in the Roman Empire. Think of all the things that they can. Oh, let's examine him by flogging. Terrifying.
And that brings us to the end of Acts chapter 22.
So, we have to wait.
I'll tell you how it ends. He dies. Questions, thoughts? Oh, bring it. Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you.